how you start changing your past is by changing your actions in the now, in the present moment. So if my past is full of me making bad decisions and mistakes and hurting people, how I change that is by changing my actions in the here and now. I start to write a new story.
The whole idea of expectation is that it undermines the joy. So when you build up an expectation, it's like your own visions of how reality should be actually get in the way of how reality is.
If you are someone who gives more to the universe than you take, then you're always a net positive in whichever environment you find yourself in. When God made the universe, he made it in a 1 week span. So to me, that's like, okay, there's some wisdom there that God himself does things by the week. So I'm like, okay, I will trust that God knew what he was doing. And so I will focus on the weeks in my life.
Hi, and welcome to the Acceptance of Life podcast, episode 4. This episode is all about time, the perception of time, how this perception colors our consciousness, our behaviors, and how it often limits us. So we also talk about the ways we can free ourselves from the limitations of time, especially from the past. In the podcast, Vajin explains how the present actually shapes our past instead of the other way around. We discuss the reality of the eternal now and how the present moment really is the only reality that we have. So how do we live in the eternal now? Can we actually live in the eternal now? We also touch upon other interesting questions and topics, such as the difference between being a generalist and a specialist, and how it's really much more fulfilling being a generalist. We discuss the difference between quantity versus quality, and how in our society the emphasis really has shifted towards a higher appreciation of quantity, which was also exemplified by our spiritual teacher Sri Chinmoy, who was really a master of versatility and who had an amazing creative output. We also discussed the ancient spiritual or biblical story about Adam and Eve and the fall from paradise, and how that symbolizes really the beginning of our long spiritual journey back to self-discovery and to reclaim that ancient and eternal divine childhood that we lost. So there's enough here to fill an hour and a half of deep spiritual conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, we'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe, leave a comment or a review. And without any further ado, I hope you enjoy this episode. Today, you want to talk about time.
Yes, I thought time being so fundamental to our experience of life is something that's worth discussing and looking into a little bit. And time is far more complicated or far more complex, I think, than people give it credit for. So I think most of us have quite a simplistic view of time. And I think our culture gives us a lot of that perspective on time. And so what time is at its most simple level is the apparent continuity of existence flowing from past to present and from present into the future. And so I think that's how most people in the world today would experience time. But it's also not the only way of looking at time. So I think that's something worth having an interesting discussion around.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I know from the spiritual point of view, our teacher, Sri Chinmoy, talked about earthly time and heavenly time. So whenever we were in an ordinary, mundane consciousness, let's say, we experience earthly time, where 1 second goes to another second, fills the hour, an hour fills the day. And you have this sense of time passing. And I think it's very much tied to the mind's experience of life and of time is earthbound. Whereas if you are in heaven-free time, we are in the eternal now. So that's when time, I think the experience of time stops. So you don't even have a sense of time passing. You are in the eternal now. You're in the here and now. And life, there's no sense of time passing. There's no sense of seconds, minutes, hours, when you are completely aware and fully present.
That sounds like a wondrous space to be operating in.
Yeah. So definitely we are striving more to be in heavenly time.
Yeah.
The time where, exactly, eternal time. It's called the eternal now. So what is your perspective on time?
Well, I think let's start with by looking at what people commonly or how people commonly experience time. And so, if we divide time into three different distinct spaces, so we have the past, we have the present, and we have the future. And I think most people who've had a similar sort of upbringing or similar sort of experience to us have this idea of the past creating the present and then our actions in the present creating the future. And so we see it as a linear process. So the past on the left, the present in the middle, and then the future on the right. And so that would be, I think, how most people or many people around the world today would imagine the experience of time. And I know they did a really interesting study with students in America, and they gave them three circles, and they labeled each of the circles past, present, and future. And they asked the students to array them in front of them as to how they think the experience of time occurs. And so, as we write from left to right in most of the Western world, most people would put those things, past on the left, present in the middle, the future on the right. And so that was nearly all of the students. There was, however, a group of students from some of the Asian countries, and they took the spaces, the circles of past, present, and future, and they stacked them on top of each other.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
so for me, that's really fascinating. That's really interesting because obviously from their culture and their upbringing, they had a different picture of the experience of time. And that's one of the wonderful things about time is we try and divide it up into past, present, and future. But in fact, the only thing that really seems to exist is the present.
Well, that's
And
exactly, that's the idea of the eternal now, that everything
exactly.
happens, which is
And
the teaching of Eckhart Tolle, right? He is always
oh,
talking
yes.
about the power of now.
Yeah. And there is something incredibly powerful about centering ourselves in the present because in the present, we have access to transformation. We can create actions, which is going to transform our future or our past. We have access to all of our capacities. We have access to all of the experiences. All the experiences we have in life are all occurring in the now. And so there is something fundamentally powerful about centering our awareness in that space.
And so, were the Asian students, were they having that perspective of everything happening now? Is that why they stacked those circles on top of each other?
I think so. I think that was the view that was taken, that they saw that all of those things, the past, present, and future, actually everything exists here and now.
Hmm.
And so, how I like to look at it, which gives a different taste or a different experience, is if we look at how we see the world, most of us feel as though what happened in the past has created our present moment. Would you agree on that?
Yes.
So people feel that what happened in the past, so whether there were good incidents or bad incidents, their upbringing, their studies, their work experiences, all of those things have led to you being in the particular situation you're in at the moment.
Hmm.
And so most people see their life now as a result of what happened in the past. And then from that, they take the position that, okay, if I want to have a better future, I need to be working towards the future. So I'm creating my future in the now. So the actions I'm taking now are creating my future. And so
Right.
that's how I think, especially in the Western world, that's how people live. And so the problem that creates is that it's delayed gratification. We're constantly putting off everything till some point in the future. And so if we look at our story that we have in the West of what a good life looks like, we're born and then we start the process of education. And it's an never-ending cycle. So we start in our primary school and then we move through that. And finally we finish at the primary school and then we move to the next stage, to the secondary school. And then finally when we achieve that and it's like, okay, we've finished that, then we go to the tertiary education or the university education. And so we're constantly delaying the gratification and the experience of enjoying our life for some future achievement. It's always being put off. It's like, when I do this, then I can be happy. So once I finish my studies, then I can really start living. But the
It
problem is,
seems only in the West, you really start living only when you're 65, when you can enjoy your pension, right?
exactly. So this
Like
is
when you
almost
stop
this.
your work
Yeah.
life and finally you've arrived at the golden age where you can now just kick back and enjoy your life.
Exactly. So we're never allowing ourselves to really experience the full beauty and majesty of life because we haven't quite achieved what we need to achieve to enjoy it yet. So once we've
Hmm.
finally finished our education, then we move into the working world. And then we start off at a position and then we need to move up and we need to try and aim for the company car and the corner office and becoming partner or whatever it is. And so we're constantly delaying that gratification, as you said, until finally when we can retire and then we're allowed to enjoy life. And
And the
so,
interesting thing is, many people become completely miserable when they retire because
exactly.
they miss that daily, duty, discipline of going to work, socializing with other people, and all of a sudden they feel like I've fallen into a big black hole, and there's no, they don't know how to enjoy themselves. They've never really learned that.
Exactly. So this is the point I'm trying to get to here. And the thing is as well, I think if you look at the number of people who die quite soon after that they retire, it's
Yeah,
actually relatively high in comparison. And
yeah,
so I know many people who've worked really hard their whole lives waiting for their retirement, and then they retire and then they pass away far too soon. So it's almost a tragedy where people have delayed really the true full enjoyment of life until they think they've deserved it or they've earned it. And then when they get to the point, the problem is when you get to 65, the moment you're living in is exactly the same moment as you're living in now. You
yeah,
are suddenly, you've retired, you've achieved all the goals, but you are still here and now. And if you have not practiced being happy here and now, what is there to say, or how do you think you will be able to be happy in the here and now at that point? Because you've never done the practice. You've never actually allowed yourself to be centered and present in the here and now. And you've never allowed yourself to fully embrace and enjoy that experience because you've always been waiting for some future state where you'll have done enough, achieved enough, earned enough to actually enjoy it.
yeah. That's a very powerful idea in people's minds, right? To think that somewhere in the future I've achieved all my goals, then I will be happy. It's basically the promise of the desire life. When you fulfill a desire,
Yeah.
you have a desire, you want to make a promotion at your work, you think like, oh, if I become the CEO, or if I have this big promotion, or if I get this amount of money or this amount of salary, this car or whatever, this trip, this vacation, then I'll be happy. And then that is always turns out to be so disappointing because
Yeah.
once that moment rolls around, like you say, there's no, the big magic which people expected, would descend upon their heads, this big feeling of happiness and joy, somehow not really there, and they're just discover, oh my God, it's not. There's often a feeling of emptiness that follows the fulfillment of a desire.
Yeah, and I think that we see that on a smaller scale on a day-to-day basis through our life when we have a lot of anticipation for a particular event. It might be a celebration or a party or something that we're looking forward to, or a holiday, a vacation somewhere nice. And how often does that experience actually turn out to be underwhelming compared to our anticipation of it? We think, oh my God, it's going to be so great. I'll be there on the beach. And then we get there to the beach and it's too hot, or the weather's bad, or there's too many mosquitoes, or we get sunburnt on the first day. And all of these realities of life that are happening in the here and now actually, when we actually have the experience of fulfilling the desire life or chasing after those desires, I have never come across a situation where people feel as though that it was in some way far better than they thought it was going to be. And normally
I
people,
think the whole idea of expectation is that it undermines the joy. So when you build up an expectation, it's like your own visions of how reality should be actually get in the way of how reality is, and that discrepancy makes you feel, yeah, like you say, underwhelmed, and gives you that feeling of emptiness and not being fulfilled in the
yeah.
moment.
And
It's
and
the
the,
very nature of desire to be unfulfilled.
Yeah, and very often the experience, if you actually experienced it as it was, so if you're fully present at the musical concert and really had all of your awareness centered in that moment and experienced it as fully as you possibly could, perhaps it actually would be an amazing experience. But because you created this picture of what you thought it would be like, it's like that discrepancy between the two things, between your expectation and reality. You're in some way already undervaluing or devaluing the experience you actually have. So
Yeah,
in some way, by learning to center yourself in the now and experience and accept, like as we talked about in early episodes, the power of acceptance, accepting the experience for as it is, and not having prejudged of what it should look like, what it should feel like, you actually allow the beauty of life and the experience to manifest in its own way, and you're not fighting against reality then.
Yeah, you basically don't want to get in the way of reality.
Yeah.
It's the same as when you go and you're walking through the city looking for a restaurant, and you just amble on the street somewhere, and you just enter into this restaurant, and it turns out to be such a fantastic experience. The food is great, the service is good, the restaurant is cozy, and you're having such a good time. And so you say to your friends, okay, let's meet here again next time. And that next time when you go there again is always disappointing, right? Because the
Yeah.
magic of that first restaurant experience was the fact that you had no expectations,
Yes.
and then life could surprise you. And then when you try to recreate that, somehow it doesn't happen, right? Somehow it doesn't seem to work.
Yeah. So there's something to this idea which I think is very valuable, and one of the things is with your own spiritual practice. Your spiritual practice is the practice of being in the here and now. So when you sit down to do your practice, your meditation or your breath work, you're attempting to bring your entire conscious awareness into the here and now. And it's a practice of trying to stay there, because your mind is constantly trying to pull you out of the here and now and to take you somewhere into the future or take you somewhere into the past.
Mm.
And that practice of learning to let those thoughts go and return to the focus in the here and now becomes a place from which you can live. So you can start to live fully present in this moment. And that is going to radically transform your experience of life.
So I want to also defend a little bit the idea that we have here in the West of working towards something. I
Yes.
think there's also something valuable in that,
Yeah.
because it gets us off our seat, out of our bed, into our lives and into action. Because if we did not have that desire to do something and to achieve something, we'd not do anything. And
Yeah.
so that idea of that we are working towards something, that we have to get out of bed and do something, that does motivate us and gets us out into the world, socialize with other people, and that way make progress. And so I think there's also a value to having that desire, having that expectation. Don't you think?
Oh, I totally agree. And I think our teacher, when he came from India and came to the West, he really saw that there was this tremendous urge to move forward and make progress and to create and to be productive. And he saw that as incredibly valuable, but he saw that valuable in its relationship to the practice of stillness and presence and meditation and living in the present moment. So he saw in the East that people had been practicing that art of learning to live in the moment and to be present and to give their appreciation to the divine. But they were not aiming for material fulfillment. They were not aiming to better their material situation. And so that led to all sorts of suffering and hardship in many of the eastern parts of the world. Whereas the West had barreled headlong into improving the material standard of living. But they had done that at the price of the inner fulfillment. So I think he was attempting to synthesize, to bring those two different ideas together and show that each had value. And if we were really going to harmonize our lives and improve the standard of the world, we needed both. Because we can see that in the West, we've got more material prosperity than any culture or any civilization has ever had before. But yet, our mental health statistics and our spiritual or an internal experience of life is sadly lacking the fulfillment that you would think we would get from those external circumstances. So I think for us in the West, the goal is to learn how to balance those two things. So to have that inspiration and that push to move forward and make things better and to make our own circumstances better, but also to have the fulfillment and learn how to appreciate the moment as it is. Because as we said, we're all going to end up in a point where our role is no longer production and being efficient and trying to create material prosperity. And instead, it's our time to experience and enjoy life. And if we have never done the work to make that practice part of our lives, we're going to be someone who is unhappy and unfulfilled at that point in their lives.
Yeah, very true. And so, but that's not easy. Like, how do we get to that mindset where we do have the inclination to be dynamic, to be active, yet not to expect? It's super hard to do that.
It is, and I think the thing is learning to integrate the mind and the heart together, because when you're just trying to move through your life using the mind as the master and as the main tool that you use, your mind is never going to be satisfied. So your mind will be like, okay, I've got one car, I want a nicer car now. I've got one house, I need a nicer house, or a holiday home, or a house in a better country, or a house in a better climate, or a bigger house. So there's no end to the mind's desires. But if we can integrate the mind's ability to look towards the future and make plans and to aim towards something ahead of us, but we use the wisdom of the heart to guide us, then we're in a completely different position. So then we're using the heart as the master and the mind as the servant. So the heart, through our own inspiration and through our own inner depths, we will be inspired. And that's the big worry that people have. Okay, if I don't use my mind and if I try and practice being in the here and now, won't I just give up on life? Won't I just become some lazy fellow who just sits around and enjoys just the moment as it is in some sort of state of bliss?
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem to be the state people find themselves in when they become truly connected with their heart. There seems to be a level of joy and enthusiasm for life and inspiration that comes naturally from the heart. And when you see spiritual teachers or spiritual masters, they're so dynamic. They're not people who are just sitting around enjoying the bliss of meditation. And perhaps when I started my meditation journey, that was what I was thinking. I was like, the best thing to do is to really learn to meditate, be able to forget about all the problems of the world and just exist in some sort of blissful state of consciousness. But
Yeah, so I'm just going to pause you for a second there,
yes.
because I had the brilliant idea to put on my washing machine and it's running really loud. So
Okay.
I'm just gonna stop it for a second and I'll come back. And we're back. And so, yes, you were talking about the spiritual masters and how dynamic they are.
Exactly. And so there's something, if I look at our teacher, Sri Chinmoy, he is someone who valued time more than any other person I've ever seen on earth. He was so careful to not even waste one moment. And I think that's the thing that people get wrong. They think that if they let go of this obsession with the future and become only focused in the now, and they find some sort of joyful state of being, that they won't be inspired to do anything in the world. But I think, in fact, the exact opposite happens, that when you truly understand the richness and the value of the now, if you could truly understand that, you would never waste one single moment. And that's what I saw with Sri Chinmoy when I've been with him when he was traveling. He would be at the airport writing songs, drawing birds, writing aphorisms. Wherever he went, he was on a bus trip or a boat trip, he was constantly inspired to do something creative or do something self-giving for the world.
Yeah.
And I've never met anyone who was as dynamic and inspired at every moment as he was. So
plus, also, he told us many times that when he is, when we see him, he's also doing things on the inner planes. So a spiritual master can work on many planes at the same time. So when he was even, writing poems or creating birds drawings or doing some creative things, he was also helping his disciples. He was, God knows what he was doing on the inner plane, but he said he could do many things at the same time, which is totally mysterious. And I think only a really realized person understands that level of action.
Yeah.
But yeah, they have the capacity to work on many inner planes as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so to see that, I think that is the example that we should be aiming towards when you see these people who are what I call divinely inspired. So their inspiration is not relying on the outer circumstances or how they're feeling on that particular day or what's going on in their lives. Instead, they're connected to that wellspring of deep inspiration and creativity that's really the heart of existence. Because if you look at the universe, the universe, everything is happening in the moment. Everything is happening in this eternal now. So the creation of a star or the movement of a planet or life itself forming, it is all happening in the here and now. It does not seem that the universe is constantly, is the universe doesn't seem to be doing things now. So in the future, it is creating some sort of
But
state.
what about the idea of evolution, though? Isn't
So
that a process that's happening now with the idea that it's becoming better in the future?
So I think that is that divine creative spirit is manifesting itself through reality. So when we see things changing and growing and developing and becoming better suited to their environment or their situation, I think that is that creative spirit that someone like Sri Chinmoy is connecting to. That there is some divine movement towards some higher reality or some more perfect reality, and that is inherent inside the universe. And so evolution for me would be a clue or a manifestation of that force in action.
Yeah, I have a poem here on one of my kitchen doors that says, "Perfection is transcendence. Transcendence is perfection." And what you said reminded me of that, because the idea of evolution is the idea of transcendence,
Yes.
to go beyond what you've already known, and then that movement of going beyond something that you've already known, the movement of going beyond your boundaries, that itself is the movement of moving towards greater perfection. And I
Yes.
think perfection is not it's not a fixed state, it's not a fixed goal, but it's an ongoing process. So it's a verb. It's like I'm
Mm.
perfecting my life. I'm becoming a better person all the time. It's like I'm constantly updating myself to become a better version of me, and that process is never ending. And that whole process is transcendence, because you're transcending yourself, and at the same time you're becoming better. You're becoming more perfect, if you want to use that term. So yeah, that's interesting. I think evolution, transcendence, perfection are linked somehow.
Yes, indeed. I totally agree. And if we even look at our own planet and we look at the journey of life on our planet, because if we look at the universe itself, it's hard to, because it's happening on such a galactic and cosmic scale, it's hard to see exactly the patterns or the progress of the universe towards some form of perfection or betterment. But if we look at life, so over the last 3.5 billion years on Earth, life started as incredibly simple organisms. And then over time, those organisms became more and more complex until they finally led to the point where we are now, where we have a self aware consciousness, which is the only self-aware consciousness that we know of in the universe. And so perhaps there's other types of beings on different planets or different parts of the universe. It's so vast that it would be almost inconceivable if there wasn't. But this is what we know from our own perspective. And there's a really nice idea, I think, that we are the aperture through which the universe is able to experience itself. And so I mean that as human beings becoming self-aware in our consciousness, we are the way in which the universe can see and experience itself through our unique perspectives. And that seems that the universe sees some value in that, because the thing is, we've got to think about with evolution and with the life forms that we've grown into and become, we didn't design ourselves, we didn't create ourselves. In some ways, it's some force has been acting through life, and we are the highest manifestation of that force at this point. And that's why we're the only ones who have the problem of time. Because like if we compare time, the experience of time for other living beings on Earth with the experience that human beings have, so human beings, as we said, we feel we're victims of our past and we are trying to create a better future. If we look at other animals are simply existing in the here and now. And so if you see a lion walking the plains in the savannah and the Serengeti, the lion is not worrying about what happened yesterday, and he's not concerned about what's going to happen in the future. He is simply acting out his own natural state of being in that present moment. And we don't see animals suffering from depression like human beings do, because as long as animals are able to act out their natural set of behaviors, they're completely fulfilled. So if you see a lion, he's able to hunt and do what a lion does. You don't see him sitting around and having an existential crisis about whether it's right to eat the gazelles, and how the gazelle population is going to do over the next 50 years, and whether the changing environment is going to have some negative effects on that. You don't see him in those situations. But if you put a lion in the zoo or any wild animal and you stop it acting out its natural set of behaviors, then it does become depressed. So, but I think animals' experience of life is the experience of the now. Whereas human beings, we've somehow stepped outside the eternal now, and we've become the victims of time in some way.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. At the same time, we are evolutionary, you could say, more evolved
Yes.
than the animals. We are self-aware.
Yeah.
And it seems that we have to pay a price for that self-awareness.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's a tremendous gift, because we can become realized, enlightened. We can know ourselves truly to the core. So we can become one with our souls. We can become one with the divine. Um, and we become completely self-aware. And we can experience these higher planes of bliss and joy and love and all these beautiful qualities, but it does come at a price. So when you
Exactly.
are become self-aware, you can also become self-conscious. You can start doubting yourself. You can become insecure. You can become jealous. These are all things that animals are not troubled by. So they live kind of in a paradisical state, you could say. But at the same time, they cannot escape that state. So they can also not, let's say, go beyond their nature, or experience that level of transcendence that humans can.
Yes, exactly, and I think that's the key thing, is that that state of self-awareness opens the possibility of growth and transformation that other forms of life are not able to tap into at this point. And it's really interesting, because if we look at the foundational stories of human beings, the Old Testament and the Book of Genesis really carries a lot of this very ancient stories of humanity, because for the longest time, as we said, it was the only book going. And so the oldest stories in that are a collection of stories that come from some very ancient past for humanity. And it was thought that it was only about 70,000 years ago that human beings became self-aware. And so before that, it's really hard for us to imagine, but human beings existed here with all of the other animals, and we were in some way like them, completely in the here and now. So we had a natural set of behaviors which we would act out in the moment, but we could not imagine abstract thinking, and we could not imagine new and different realities in the future. And so a good example, I was thinking about this to try and get your head around what that would be like, is if you came across an animal, you would just simply react to that situation. But once you became self-aware and you were able to think of the future, you could think, okay, if I came across that animal again, how could I try and interact with it in a different way that would be beneficial to me? So you might try and make a trap for it, or you might try and make some tools or weapons. So you start to be able to think in the future how to change your situation to make it more advantageous. And so that's why human beings have flourished in the way that they have. But in the book of Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve, for me, that is the story of human beings becoming self-aware. So there's this idea that there was a tree, which was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they were told not to eat from that tree. And before they ate from that tree, it was said that Adam, so this was Adam and Eve, so that Adam walked with God. So Adam was in some way in tune, in alignment, in harmony with this divine force. And then after they ate from that tree, suddenly they became self-aware, they became self-conscious. And so the first thing, when God came to walk with Adam and Eve that evening of that day, Adam was hiding in the bushes, covering his own nakedness. And so there's no better example of someone suddenly becoming self-aware and self-conscious as that. And it was said from that time that human beings would no longer live in paradise. We would be forced to suffer, and we would be forced to work, because other animals don't have the concept of work. So I don't think a lion, for example, when he's out hunting and doing what a lion does, he doesn't see that as work. He doesn't feel that, oh God, it's another day, I've got to check in and try and catch a gazelle again.
What about a beaver building a dam? I mean, that
So
seems very close to work.
yeah, but this is them acting out their natural instinct and their natural behavior. So they're
Sure.
doing that purely in the here and now, but it does lead to a better future for them. But it's something that is they're not consciously thinking in that way that that is what they're attempting to do. They just know that this is what they should do. It's they're acting in the most natural way for them possible. It's the same with I always think of a squirrel collecting acorns,
Yeah.
and if you ask the squirrel why he's doing that, he probably couldn't tell you why he
Did you
was
ask?
doing it.
Did you
I've
ask?
tried many times, but they're existing in a
Ah,
different reality than I am. So
pesky little fellows. They just run away before you get a chance to pose the question.
exactly, but I think these stories tell us something about this because for human beings, this would have been like a great boon, but also a great tragedy because in some ways we lost that connection to the natural way of life, and we're still paying the price of that now because, as I said, animals become depressed when they can't act out their natural behaviors. And human beings, we're unable to act out our natural set of behaviors because we've forgotten what they are, because
Yeah.
we've gone so far into this world of consciousness and developed our abilities that we've actually forgotten what it feels like to be in tune with reality and with nature, and so we're paying the price for that. So we've
But if
created
you look at,
material prosperity, but
yeah,
there's a price to pay.
for sure. If you look at children, I think they come closest to how it is living your true nature, right? I mean,
Exactly.
children, yeah, they don't have to think about how they have to behave. They just are in the moment. They're spontaneous, and they seem to be really happy. Like a child in its own natural environment, when it's not being abused or anything like
Yeah.
that, when it's like growing up normally. Like if I remember my childhood, it was such a happy time, and
Yes.
there was no worry about what happened yesterday. There was, I mean, not really. And there was no big anxiety about the future. And you're just happy, just playing the whole day with your friends. And it was a very paradisical state. I think, it's interesting that life starts out with, for many people, almost the best part, like
Yeah.
childhood,
And
which
I,
is like free of worries, free of anxieties, free of all these,
Yeah, and I have a
things.
similar memory. I remember being at my kindergarten, and I was probably 4 years old. And I remember telling my mother, and she always tells the story that I said to her, "I think this is good. I think I'll just stay here for the rest of my life,"
Oh, yeah?
because I remember looking around and seeing the adults, and the adults seemed in some way dull and cautious,
Yeah.
and that their
Yeah.
life seemed full of stress and worry and anxiety in some way. And so I already had an aversion at a very young age to becoming what I could see was further down the pipeline.
I was the same. I was the same. I told my mother I don't want to grow up. I want to remain a child forever. When I
Yeah.
was like 7 or 8 years old. Yeah.
And so the interesting thing is, it seems like we're on a journey to rediscover that walking with God, being in tune with divinity and with reality, but to do it from a place of being consciously aware of what we're doing. So we
Yeah.
get that glimpse as a child where we're naturally in tune with reality and with the divine. And then we fall out of that, and we have to have this experience of work and suffering and all of the challenges that come with life. But I think the goal is always to return to being in tune. It's like that idea that you have to go on a great journey to return to where you started from, but only
Mm.
then could you see it truly for the first time.
Yeah, you return with greater wisdom, right?
Yeah.
It's like in the beginning there's innocence as a child, but there's also a level of ignorance. You just don't know any better, and then when you return there, you come with a great deal of wisdom. So when you look at the spiritual masters, they were very childlike in their behavior.
Yes.
They were very wise, but they had a childlike quality about them. Like they could, any of the great masters, you look at them and it's almost like they're children in some way.
Yeah, and we want to differentiate between being childlike and childish. So,
Yes, we
so
did
we
talk
didn't
about this
see
previously, but
we
yes.
didn't see great masters having tantrums and
Yeah.
throwing their food around, but
No.
instead we saw them embodying that very natural and spontaneous way of life and that real playfulness with reality, where they didn't seem to be taking it as heavily and seriously as many of us struggle with in life.
Yeah.
And so one thing we can say as well is, if we look at our own problems and our own suffering in life, how much of that suffering is actually happening in the here and now, and how much of it are we creating by either worrying about things that have never happened and perhaps never will happen, or reliving past experiences that were difficult and traumatic. And so, what do you think about that?
Oh, it seems a very, very easy question, that one. I would
Yes.
say, like, it's definitely not in the here and now. It's definitely happening in our mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely happening. Like, we have a saying in Dutch that um, there's no greater suffering than the suffering that one fears.
Yes.
So it actually rhymes when you say it in Dutch. And
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, we create so much suffering in the anticipation of problems
yeah,
that perhaps never happen. And perhaps the greatest example of this is, I know they've done a study on people who have actually been tortured. And so obviously torture is one of the most horrific and worst experiences you could ever have as a human being. But the funny thing about the study was, they found out the worst thing everyone said about being tortured is the anticipation of being tortured. Like, when you're
mm,
waiting for the guy to start torturing you, that's actually, for people who have been tortured, that's actually much worse than actually being tortured itself. So that's so funny that our fear and anticipation of an event can actually be so much worse than the actual experience. And we all know that, like, when we go to the dentist, many people suffer from some anxiety and fear and worry. And you think, oh my God, it's going to be so bad. When you're actually in the dentist chair, in that particular moment, it's never really as bad as you imagined it was going to be. And so your own fear creates far more suffering than the experience actually gives you.
yeah, yeah. True, true.
So, so
So
if,
do you think that, coming back to Adam and Eve, so do you think that the fall from paradise, as it is described, was a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it was a necessary thing, because it was the thing that required us. Because the idea was, if you ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you would become like God. And so that was the serpent. His When he was talking to Eve, he said God doesn't want you to become like him. And perhaps God was attempting to save human beings from the suffering that he knew would ensue from knowing the knowledge that would come from that, from becoming self-aware, but also for us to become like the divine, to become a divine creator, to become a fully mature being in this universe. It seems like we have to go through this journey. It's part of the game to become self-aware and then to return to that source, but doing it willingly, consciously, and from a place of full recognition of the true nature. So
Yeah.
for me, it's a very important part of the game. But you can imagine, for civilizations or beings or people that went through that time, what a weird, like, it's impossible for us to imagine how weird that would have been from your brains, because it happened very quickly, people, they think, because
Like,
how.
what would be weird? Like the quote unquote fall from paradise, you mean?
Yeah, but like, so it's also known as the cognitive revolution. So we went from being able to think only in terms of
Ah,
our natural behavior to suddenly being able to imagine things that have never existed. And because how they track that evolution of consciousness, it's the beginning of creativity. It was the beginning of rock and cave art. And so that's why they have a date of about 70,000 years ago, because before that, there was no hint of that sort of creativity. And suddenly,
ah,
after that point, there was all sorts of things being created. And
yeah,
so we've got this situation where we know that in the present moment is where we're most powerful. It's where all of the joy and all of the love and all of the connection and meaning happens in existence. And it's the only thing that we're really certain of. The only thing I think we can be truly certain of is the present. Like, the future is some concept. And the thing with the future is we never get there. So we can say, oh, in the future, this will happen. When you get there, you'll be here. So you never arrive in the future. And so having that as your focus of where you put your attention seems to be the wrong focus. And so my picture of things, which helps me, I think, it makes life feel more meaningful to me, is that I have a different picture of how time works. So as we said, there's the common picture in our culture is the past creates the present, and then the present creates the future. So if I use a little analogy so you could see what I'm talking about. So if we look at a ferry boat crossing across the harbor, and so if we look at the ferry boat, if it's a nice still day, you'll see the ferry boat traveling across the harbor, and behind the boat will be the ripples of the wake. And so if our model is correct that the past creates the future, we would look at that situation and would say, oh, the ripples and the wake behind the boat, they must be pushing the boat across the harbor.
Ah,
And you see, when you look at it like that, you're like, oh, okay, the past is not creating the present. Instead, it's the other way around. The present, the boat moving in the present moment is creating the ripples behind it. So the ripples are like the ripples of the present moment. They're like the wake of what's happening in the here and now.
let's say the consequences of your actions in the present.
Exactly. So how the boat is creating the past is it's doing it right now in the present. So as the boat is moving forward, the boat is creating the past behind it. And
Yes, it's
so
creating the ripples behind it.
exactly. And so then if we take that metaphor and we bring it into our own lives and we start to think, okay, is the past creating my present moment, or is my present actions creating my past?
Mm,
And I
that is an
think I
interesting
think
point.
if you look at it objectively and zoom out, you'll see actually no, my past is a ripple or a picture of every action that I took in the present moment. And so for me, that's incredibly liberating, because if you are a result of your past, then all of the problems, all of the negative experiences you've had, all of the lack of opportunities, all of the situations that didn't go your way, you're a victim to all of those things. So if the past is creating the present, you're always a
Yes.
victim to the past. So you don't have full agency over your own life, even. It's like, well, how could I be any different? Like, all of these bad things happen to me, so of course my life is going to be terrible. But if you change your perspective and say, okay, my past is not how I would like it to be. How do I go about changing my past? You cannot return to the past and have any power to interact with it. But how you start changing your past is by changing your actions in the now, in the present moment. So if my past is full of me making bad decisions and mistakes and hurting people, how I change that is by changing my actions in the here and now. I start to write a new story. I start to write a better story that more truly reflects who I truly want to become, or who I truly feel that I am.
And so, what about people who do have, horrific experiences in their past? Like, let's say they were soldiers who were in a war situation, or they were abused in their childhood, or they went through really traumatic experiences. I mean, that way, doesn't the past also have an effect on the present, and does in some way create the present?
I mean, you can totally look at it that way, but you just have to ask yourself what position gives you the most power and agency. Because there's an idea that I like, is people say, well, is that true? Or is that real? Did that really happen? And my position would be, is you're asking the wrong question. What the question you should be asking is, does that work? So if I have a story that I tell you that has some sort of a moral, or it has some sort of idea embedded in the story, you could say, oh, but that story's not true. That never happened. But if the information that the story is trying to tell you is actually works in the world, like if you actually start living it out, it will actually have positive, measurable results in the world, then I would say that that is real. And that's more important than whether it's true or not. So whether it happened or not is not important, but it's like, does this idea actually work in the world? And
So what
so
about people who do have PTSD, let's say, and they want to create a better past, so they start working on themselves in the present, but then they run into all these difficulties from their traumas, let's say, that they,
yeah,
they can't
and
really.
that's a very valid point, but I would always say that the transformation they're looking for is going to happen in the here and now. So when you have issues or troubles or patterns of behavior that are no longer serving you, they're not appearing in your past, they're appearing in your present. So
Yes.
so those things are appearing in your present, and you will deal with them in the present. So
Mm.
you might have certain ways of dealing with life or certain habits, and you could say, oh, well, how could I change them? Because that's what happened in the past, and I'm a victim of that. And I would always say, no, 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 you at every moment have a choice. You have a choice of what you're going to say, how you're going to act. You have a choice of, like, I like to put myself in the position of the author of the story of my life. And I'm writing the story at this chapter, and I'm in my 44th year at the moment. So I'm writing chapter 44 at the moment. And so when I look back and I see problems that happened in chapter 20 or chapter 21, I can't go back and rewrite that story. That story, like the story is a one-time story. It's like you get one chance to write it. You can't go back and make corrections. So if I'm all the time worried about what happened in chapter 21, I'm not going to be fully here writing the best possible story I can. And so for me, that gives me a real feeling of agency. It gives me a real feeling of power. And it gives me a real feeling, actually, funnily enough, of the value of time when I'm here and now taking the responsibility of writing the story of my life. And
Why?
because I see that suddenly I have a responsibility. So I have a responsibility to write the best possible story. So the fact that I'm alive and conscious in this amazing universe, the likelihood of that happening is so incredibly remote that irregardless of the situations I've been in or the problems that I've had, simply the opportunity to be in this universe and to be conscious and to be able to experience it in the way that we can experience it, to me makes me feel like, oh my God, this is such a responsibility to do the best possible job with this life as I can. And if I look at the last year of my life, 2024, I'm so proud of that year because I would say that was the best year of my life. And it's the best year not simply because of what happened to me, but it was because of the actions I took in the moment on a daily basis. And a lot of people feel as though that their golden days are behind them, that the best time of their life was when they were in their 20s or they were in their 30s and they had more freedom or they had more energy, perhaps. But my own life to me is a living proof that each year can become better, because each year you should become a better author of the story of your life. So each year, the story that you're writing down in the history, you're writing it in the moment, it becomes more truly aligned with who you truly are. So last year, I feel like I was the best possible version of myself. Like I was getting closer and closer to who I truly am. And I feel like this year I have the exact same opportunity. If I make the right choices in the here and now and act out the best possible present as I can, the story of my life in this year will transcend the story from last year.
And so what kind of decisions are you talking about? Can you give some concrete examples? Like from a
Yeah,
day-to-day basis, you go to work, you do your things.
exactly. And it's like, so one big thing is, where am I? Is my consciousness where I am, and is it in what I am doing? So the more I can bring myself into the here and now. So when we talk about mindfulness for me is simply the practice of bringing your awareness into what you are doing. So instead of me being at work, but thinking about what I'm going to do after work, or thinking about what happened on the weekend or what I've got coming up, I try and be completely present to being at work. Like that at that moment is the most important thing I can do, because this is in the here and now. It's the place I have the most possible agency and the most possible potentiality to do something. So the more I can spend each day mindful and in the present moment, the better choices I make. And it's like Sri Chinmoy's got this great aphorism: make healthy choices and perfection will be yours. And every moment and every day is just full of small choices. And I would really say the
So give
great
some examples. Like what kind of choices are we
yeah.
talking
So
about?
this is a good question. And so a good example is every day. So I get the choice: do I wake up when my alarm goes off at 6 o'clock, or do I snooze for another 20 minutes? And do I snooze again then for another 20 minutes? And then do I end up late? And all of these things. So there's a first of all choice. Okay, do I get up when I wanted to get up? And so you make that choice. And then it's like, okay, do I sit down and do my practice, or do I get caught up in the world? And so I choose. I sit down and I do my spiritual practice. I meditate. And then I make the choice. Then I go out and I do my exercise, do something for my physical well-being in my body. And then when it comes to having something to eat, do I choose to eat French toast and pancakes every day, or do I choose to eat something perhaps a little bit more healthy? And so all of these little decisions we're making compound. And so when we look back on our day, if we made, like, say each day we make 10 good decisions and then 20 really bad decisions, we don't need to suddenly the next day say, oh, well, I need to make every decision a good decision. It's like, can I make one more good decision than I did the day before?
Or one less bad decision.
Yeah, exactly. And so often it's easier to stop doing things we know we shouldn't do. So often we're doing stupid things that we know we shouldn't do, and that's often the easiest place to start. It's easier to say, okay, I'll try and cut down on some of the stupid things that I know I shouldn't be doing. So it might be we come home from work and we're tired, and we sit down and we start scrolling Instagram, or we spend 4 hours on YouTube, or something that we know that is not in our long-term best interest. And so making good decisions, making healthy decisions, and I like to put it in that way because we don't want to judge it as this is good and this is bad. But
Mm.
there is decisions that's going to aid in our flourishing, and then there's decisions going to reduce or block.
And how do we know? How do we know if we make a decision if it's going to aid us in our flourishing, or is going to, not aid us or bring
Yeah.
us bring us back, bring us down?
Yeah, so I think that's when you need to really pay attention. So you need to become really present, and the results of your actions will always make themselves known if you choose to pay attention to them. So if you choose to spend hours on the internet surfing things, you know how you feel when you get off the computer. And you normally
Yeah.
don't feel amazing. And perhaps you'll
Yeah.
try and convince yourself that there was some value in that, and you read this and that was good. But you know on some deeper level how it made you feel. And did it give you more agency and more inspiration and more movement in a positive direction, or did it make you feel depressed and down? And
So I think that's why we have this wonderful tool called our conscience. Our
exactly
conscience.
that
Our conscience is
dangerous
going to
thing.
tell us. Yes, it's going to be. Yeah, Sri Chinmoy said, conscience is the helper of the seeker and the judge of the non-seeker. Let's
Yeah,
say, or the it can be a judge. It can be harsh, but I think if your aim is to improve your life, then your conscience is your best friend, because it's always telling you if a decision you're making is the right one or it's not the right one. And that voice of conscience is dead right.
yeah,
So we always know. So what, like you say, when you've been scrolling on Instagram for hours, your conscience is gonna bite you a little bit.
yeah,
It's gonna say, hey, that wasn't the greatest use of your time. You could have used it in a more valuable way.
yeah,
And I think if you really pay attention to your conscience, you can go a really long way in becoming a better version of yourself,
yeah.
and make conscience your friend and not a judge, not a strict judge, or an enemy.
And the problem a lot of people have made is that over the years, their conscience has spoken to them, and they've ignored it, and they've ignored it again and again and again and again. So there's a pattern and a habit of when this voice speaks, I tell it to shut up. And if you
Yeah.
find yourself in that space, it's really hard, or it's much harder to bring back that voice of the conscience, because it's like anything. If every part of existence has its own pride, you could say, and if you ignore it and ignore it and ignore it, at some point it will simply go away. And so for some
Yeah.
people, it's a matter of practice of stilling themselves enough and becoming more aware so they can actually hear it again, because it may have been many years since someone has actually heard the conscience speak to them.
Right.
And when they do start listening to it again, they need to value it. They need to listen to what it's telling them. And the conscience is such an interesting thing, because it doesn't seem to serve any purpose, like on a evolutionary or biological scale. Because it's like if you simply believed that the world was all about procreation and moving your genes forward, and in a mechanical universe, you would not wake yourself up at 4 a.m. in the morning or 3 a.m. thinking about how you mistreated someone, or how what some of your actions were wrong in some way. You
Well,
wouldn't
you,
torture
you might
yourself in that
argue the
way.
point. You may argue the point that if you do that, you become, a better, well-rounded person, therefore a more attractive mate. Therefore, you can give your genes better. Like if you become a better, well-rounded person, and you care about others and you have concern for others, you may be more, attractive as a mate. So I could make a point like that.
Yeah, and I mean,
How it could
I
be.
totally know that some people will try and argue that point, but it seems like there would be easier ways to go about just purely the advancement of the species than
Yeah,
putting this
if it's all
very
about the no, I agree. If it's all about the advancement of the species, it's a very limited view. So
yeah.
we're much broader than that, much broader than that.
Yeah, and so I feel, yeah, that the conscience is such a valuable friend, like you said. And so I really try and pay attention that at the end of the day, it's almost like I do just like a very quick, spontaneous, natural inventory, and just ask myself where I went wrong in that day. And
Mm.
and what one of the greatest things you can have in this world is peace of mind. It can never be overvalued. How wonderful it has is to have peace of mind. And you see a lot of people are trying to find peace of mind in their material success or their outer circumstances. But those things tend to create their own anxieties and worries. So the more wealth you have, the more possessions you have, the more things you have to worry about. So it doesn't seem to be ever a place where you can find true peace of mind. But the most valuable thing for me in my life is that I'm able, almost on a daily basis, to act in harmony with my values. I'm not forced to betray my own values on a daily basis. And I know that's really hard, because for many people, they have a lot of responsibilities, they have families, they have jobs, and in some way or another, often people are pushed towards betraying something they value just to make their life easier and make things happen. And so for me, though, it's one of the most wonderful things where you can start to align your outer life and your actions on a daily basis with the values and the higher vision you have for life. And when you get those two things starting to come together, you start to feel this wonderful peace of mind. You finish the day and you feel like, I'm really content. I really tried my best, and I'll make mistakes and I'm imperfect and all of those things. But for where I'm at and what I know, I really gave myself uh, to life as fully as I could and made the best decisions that I was able to on that day. And that is, to me, that is a day well spent. And that is much more valuable than any outer success or outer circumstances.
Yeah, 100%. I think the definition of peace of mind, you could say, is a happy conscience.
Oh,
You know, a
yes.
conscience that goes like, yes, you did the right things.
Yeah.
You know, and I think in a sense, conscience and the voice of God or the voice of the soul are basically the same, aren't they?
Yes, that's lovely, and I think that's a good thing to note, that when you start to be able to listen to that conscience, it's not someone else telling you what you should do. It's not
Yeah.
some fire and brimstone Old Testament God is trying to punish you or strike you down, but it's you yourself are starting to react to your own behaviors and actions and intentions in the world, and you're trying to guide yourself into being in tune, and you're trying to guide yourself back to walking with God, perhaps. So taking it back to Adam and Eve, where
Yeah.
where they fell from grace, and we're perhaps trying to return there, and perhaps that voice of conscience will be the thing that will help guide us back to walking with God again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, when you kind of lose that voice of conscience, then the outer world, the people around you, kind of have to play that role.
Yeah,
So I think that's also a function of society. When you rub against other people, then your own, rough edges become visible, and that's also a way how to, become aware at least of where you
yeah,
can improve, where you can become better. It's also in the dealings that we have with other people. That's also one of
yeah.
the ways we can make progress, right?
Yeah, well, the world for me is the greatest teacher. So you will go out into the world every day, and the world will teach you things if you choose to pay attention. And I don't think anyone gets to the end of their life and thinks, "Oh my God, I lived such a good, moral, upstanding life," and then find out that they didn't. I think everyone knows on some level how
Yeah.
they're doing with regards to their conscience and whether they're really living in tune with their values and what they believe. And so
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's going to be surprised if there is some sort of moment of judgment or moment of reflection on their life. I don't think someone's going to get to the end of their life and go, "Oh my God, I thought I lived such a good life, and then now I find out I did it all wrong." I
Oh,
think the world and your conscience constantly along the way is trying to update you.
yeah.
And that's the thing. If you keep finding yourself in unfortunate experiences in the world and rubbing up against people the wrong way, if it happens once, you could perhaps say, maybe it's a coincidence or maybe it's someone else. But if you
It's
keep,
the other person. It's the
yeah,
other person.
if you keep finding yourself in the same type of situations, at some point, the wise person would say, perhaps there's something about me that needs to be uncovered or revealed, or transformed
Yeah,
in some way. So,
exactly.
so
Yeah.
one thing as well about time that I'm really interested in, because I know you're a great lover of time, and you're someone as well who's incredibly productive and has a real drive and inspiration to always do as much as you can and always be the best person that you can. And I always see it when we travel to New York for our meditation celebrations. You've always got so much dynamism, and you'll be doing one activity, you'll be singing, and you'll be running, and you'll be going to a play practice, and you're always so dynamic. And many people suffer from not having that drive. They don't have that inspiration that pushes them to try and achieve as much as possible. And I'll try this idea out on you for size, and you can see what you think. And so there's an idea that has been studied, and it's the idea that the work you have expands to fill the time available to do it. And so that
Wow.
the work you have expands to fill the time available you have to do it. So if I give you a job and I say you've got 8 hours to do it, you will do it in such a way that it takes you 8 hours. And it's
Yeah.
like everyone knows from their student days, if you get given an assignment and you get 2 months to do it, you don't finish it in the first 2 weeks. Nearly
Yeah.
everyone finishes it in the last day. And so
True.
there's something about time and deadlines that creates some real momentum in your life. And so
And
people
whereas that is completely arbitrary, like the
exactly
2 months,
e-
totally arbitrary. But
exactly
somehow, when that formula is presented to you, you have 2 months.
yeah.
Automatically, you start unconsciously probably building. Oh, I have loads of time. I don't have to start doing this. I can procrastinate.
Exactly. And so what I'm thinking is, okay, how do I live my life in such a way that I feel the impetus of time to live in the now in the best possible way I can? And so the problem with time is that like big numbers or big measurements always seem large. So if I tell you in your life that you've got 20,000 more days, you'll think, oh my God, 20,000. Oh, that's so many. That's great. I don't need to think about that. Or if I tell you you've got 30 or 40 years, because a year is a big measurement, it's kind of hard to grapple with exactly how long a year is. So when I think of my life, okay, maybe let's say I've got 30 more good years here. Then, if we're looking at that model of the work you have will expand to fill the time available, then if I could think to myself, oh, I've got 30 more years, then I don't need to worry that much about living a good life this week or next month, because I've got like 29 years more to figure out how to live a good life. So
Clean up my act.
it doesn't really push you towards becoming better in the here and now. And so for me, the right measurement is the week. And so I like a week, 1 week, so 7 days. And it's wonderful that when God made the universe, he made it in a 1 week span. So to me, that's like, okay, there's some wisdom there that God himself does things by the week. It didn't say,
Yes.
oh, he took 12 years or,
Yeah.
6 months. He did it in 1 week. So I'm like, okay, I will trust that God knew what he was doing. And so I will focus on the weeks in my life. And
Very
so,
nice.
so if I'm thinking of 30 years is about 1,500 weeks. And suddenly when it gets to that point, 1,500 weeks, like I know how quickly a week can go. Like that's
Yeah.
actually not as long as perhaps people imagine they've got left. And so I started a few weeks ago. So now I have 1,497 weeks left in my life. And
Okay. So
so
you think you have 30 more years in you. That's
yeah,
it.
I'm just throwing a number out there. I mean, I actually choose to live as though this is the last year of my life. And some people, when I tell them that, they feel as though there's something morbid, or some people just tell me, no, you don't say that. You've got so many more years to go. And I'm like, I don't want to think that I've got so many more years to go. I want to live as
No.
though, because the choice is, if this was the last year of my life, how would I choose to live it? What would I choose to fill my time with? And for me, that's actually the greatest possible situation you can find yourself in is if you do the thought experiment. If I won the lottery, how would I change my life? And if the answer to that is I wouldn't change my life at all, like then you're really onto something. You're really doing something, because a lot of people are
Yeah.
waiting till they win the lottery. If I won the lottery, then I could do the things that I really want to do. I could travel, or I could do this. But I feel as though if I can live my life on a daily basis is doing the things that are most valuable to me, and the things that I would do even if I had complete freedom to do anything that I wanted. That to me is the greatest type of life that I could live. And so that's my goal, is this year could be the last one. So I'm going to, because the thing is as well, life always sneaks up on you, or let's say death always sneaks up on you. So
Yes.
you really never know. But if you've already chosen to live as though this period of life is incredibly valuable and it's finite and it's running out quickly, then I think for me personally, that acts as the impetus to give myself fully and to be the best version of myself.
Well, no, I have to pay you a compliment because I think, you're really a great example of that philosophy. You do really live your life as if this is your last year. And, you go and do all the things that people dream about. You go and travel, you go and visit all these different countries every single year. I think you travel 5 or 6 months out of every year.
Yes,
Whereas you have quite a normal. I mean, you have your own business, but it's you have a small shop, so people must think this guy must be a multimillionaire. He's traveling the world, he's flying from here to there, he's doing this and that. And I mean, I know that you're not a multimillionaire by a long shot, but you do seem to pull it off somehow, which is it's completely magic if you think about it. And
exactly.
so, people would, first of all, they will wonder, how does he do it? Where does he get the money from, and the time, and how does he do that with his own business? But I mean, I've seen you do it year after year, and it's really wonderful that if you do have the mindset, you do say, I'm going to live this life in the best way I can. I'm going to travel. I'm going to visit other cultures. I'm going to spend time with my friends overseas. I'm going to visit them. I'm going to go to my spiritual community a couple of times a year for retreats. And you do seem to pack it all into a single year, which is just, I think it's amazing. So how do you do it? What's the magic?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, if I saw someone else living my life, I would think, "Oh my God, that person is amazing." It would be like there would be like some pangs of jealousy, like, "Oh my God, look what he's doing! He's getting to do all these things that I would like to do." And then
Yeah.
when I realize it is me doing these things, it is always also shocking. And it's often only when I tell people. So I'm talking to people at my shop or in passing, and they say, "What have you got coming up?" And I'll say, well, I'm traveling to New York for a meditation retreat. Then I'm traveling to Nepal to do like a month of trekking in the Himalayas. And then I'm going to India. And then I'm going out to, and then it brings it home to me like, wow, that seems really miraculous.
Yeah.
And, and I mean, people would wonder how I managed to make it happen. And the thing is, well, everything has a cost. Everything you have to pay a price for. And so, because I really value this world and I value the experiences it has to offer me, because I feel that they're transformative and I learn things from them, and I really value my friends and especially people I know through my spiritual community, but also people I meet just out there in the world. There's people out there who know things that I don't know, and as I've said, if I'm humble and open with them, they'll share those things with me. So it almost feels like my life is this great treasure hunt for wisdom and knowledge and insight, and sometimes in the weirdest and most wonderful places people will tell me things, and it feels as though that was the whole purpose of me being there, was to share that
Mm.
one moment with that person, because it'll be a piece of information that will connect two ideas that I've had in my mind but I haven't seen, say, the bridge or the link between them. And so I've had that many times where, and in the most unlikely circumstances, the most unlikely people perhaps will tell you something that you've been looking for your whole life and you didn't realize. So,
Yeah.
but like on a practical level, I think if you're someone who gives more to the universe than you take, then you're always a net positive in whichever environment you find yourself in. And so I always put myself in a position that whenever I'm with people, whenever I'm in a situation, I'm wanting to give more than I'm taking from the situation. I'm trying to offer whatever I have, whatever value that I can offer to the situation. I'll try and do that. And the universe tends to reciprocate in those situations. Then if I was traveling the world and I was like, take, me, mine, I think the whole thing would have crashed and burned a long time ago. But as long as I'm providing value to the people around me and to the world and more generally, and I think a lot of that just comes from telling stories. And as I travel and I meet people, we talk, we share ideas, and sometimes I have a different and unique perspective that they perhaps haven't considered before. And I think that's really valuable, to be exposed to people. Like it's like a traveling mendicant storyteller. It's like this was a
Yeah.
thing. This was a thing for generations and years, and especially in the pre-written, so the oral traditions. Like if you had a new storyteller come through your area, it would be the greatest boon and blessing, because he would know stories that your local storyteller didn't know, and so there'd be new information, there'd be new ideas would be brought in. And so
Mhm.
perhaps I'm trying to bring back something very ancient into the modern world that we've perhaps forgotten, the value of the stories that we tell and the ideas that we can offer through those stories. And so,
So one of the secrets I'm hearing you say is self-giving. Self-giving.
Yeah, so I really like this. I don't think there's anything that I personally need from the world. So like I don't need any possessions. Like when I travel, now I very rarely buy things when I'm out there. But what I'm looking for is experiences and connection, like moments of shared humanity, which reveal something more about the nature of reality. And so and the thing is as well, when you're giving and offering, the universe does help and reciprocate. So I've got some very kind friends who, like yourself, who will let me stay at their house and host me for a week or two, and I've got many people like that around the world. And when we're part of a community, we're part of a world family of meditators and spiritual people. So I have access and connections with people in different cities and different places, which perhaps the average person might not have. So that's
True,
always a
but I
good thing.
mean, most people in our community have that too because we are all part of the same community. Yet we don't travel as much as you do. We don't go out every, couple of months a year and do that. So that's also your sense of adventure, I think, and your sense
Yeah,
of it's part of your, I would say, your soul's mission here on
yeah,
Earth. You know,
yeah.
your soul's task
Yeah, and I
in
do
these
feel
things.
that, and it does feel very meaningful to me, and I always look to my teacher as well. So Sri Chinmoy was one of the great travelers, and so he went all over the world, visited so many different cultures, different places, met with different people, and so he himself saw some value in that connection and the experiences and the ability to share inspiration with people all over the world. And so I'm trying to follow in his footsteps in my own very small, very humble way. And but it does feel very meaningful, and as long as that remains the case, I will continue to do that. And if it doesn't feel
Yeah,
meaningful, it's not something that I'm doing because I'm completely attached to that's what I need to do. And I think that's
yeah,
important, that you don't want to attach yourself too strongly to any particular character, because then you become pigeonholed. And so it's like an actor who can only play one particular type of role. He's very much limiting the amount of films or performances he can be in. Whereas if you're an actor who's shown the ability to transform from a hero to a villain, from someone vulnerable to someone very competent, to all of these different characters you could play, then you could play in the most possible different scenarios. And so I always think that if you want to be useful to the universe, be as varied and as general as possible. Have as many different attributes and skills, because then the
be a
universe.
chameleon. Be a
Yes.
chameleon.
So yeah, and not in a bad way that you're trying
No.
to manipulate people, but instead being able to offer something in many different situations. And
Yeah.
and that's really good that you brought that up, because that's actually something that I wanted to just touch on as well, is that the type of beings that we are. And I think this is really important for people to realize, because this is one of the great flaws in our current paradigm of the world, is we are not specialists. So Homo sapiens, divine beings that we are, spiritual beings here having a human experience, we are not specialist creatures. So a specialist creature is a creature that has a very specific niche that it can live in. So for example, the giant panda in China, it can only live between a certain elevation where a certain type of bamboo grows. So their habitat and their ability to move around is severely curtailed by the niche, or the niche, I like to say. I think Americans say niche, which I find
Yeah.
very unusual, but we're going to say niche. It means the same thing as
We'll say
niche.
niche. We'll stick to niche. I like
So,
that.
so, so the idea for me is we are not specialists, and unfortunately, our society absolutely, especially in the Western world, cherishes specialists far beyond their standing.
I
And
think it's one of the big crises of our world. Too many specialists,
exactly.
and
So
everybody loses the big picture. Everybody loses the big picture.
yeah, so we've got all these people who've gone further and further down these very niche pathways, and they almost can't talk to each other now. So if we look at
Yeah,
science, if we look back in the 1800s or early 1900s, scientists had a very good understanding of the whole picture. They would understand some biology and some physics and this and that. They were scientific thinkers, and so, but they were
yeah.
big picture people. And now science has become more and more specialized into these very niche fields, and it is not helping humanity. And when we look at the people that we celebrate in the world, they're often people who've become very specialized in one very small particular task. So it might be some of the people we always put on pedestals now are footballers. or
Yeah.
athletes. And so we way overestimate the value that they're providing to society, because if we look at a professional footballer, they're very, very good at this one particular task. But then you see in their private life often that their behavior on a moral or ethical front is really leaving a lot to be desired. So they're not really the type of people I think we should be trying to emulate in our own lives, because you often see these professional sports people, their life becomes a great tragedy. So they waste all their money, their relationships fall to pieces, and there's I think there's such a great an amount of the people who've had those experiences and have shown to us that that is not the way to happiness and contentment. But yet we still continue to adore and follow these people.
Yeah, it's weird, right? It's the idea of, I think Nietzsche wrote about, the philosopher Nietzsche wrote about the man with the big ear that
Yes,
everybody rallies around, right?
yes. So, and the
What was
idea
that?
with that is that if you make yourself so specialized, you become like someone with some almost like a physical deformity. So we could say for a footballer, he's like a man with two huge legs, or
Yeah.
one massive leg, that he can kick the ball unbelievably well. But in some ways, he's not a well balanced human being. There's no
Mhm.
balance between the different aspects of his self, his being. So he's lacking in integration. He has not integrated himself properly. And if we look at societies or groups of people in the past, there's really has been an ideal of human beings as the great generalists. And so, what I mean by generalist, if we look at the type of creature we are, we can thrive in almost any environment. We can thrive in the Sahara Desert, we can survive in the Arctic Circle, we can survive in the Amazon jungle, and in all of these radically different environments, we can use our skills and our intelligence and our self-aware consciousness to find ways to be successful. And so that for me is the type of being that we are. So we can go into all sorts of different environments and find success there. And if I look at the human being, I see very clearly that we have different aspects of our being. So we have the physical body. So we need to do something that allows the physical body to express itself in some way. We've got a creative aspect. And so we need to find a way for our creative self to express those creative impulses. We've got a mind, so we've got the ability to think and become rational and reason through ideas and do things logically and deal with the world in that state. So we need to find a way to express that part of our being. And then, of course, we've got the spiritual aspect to our being, which is perhaps the most underutilized in this time and age in the Western world. And I think to be really successful in life, you need to touch on all of those different aspects. You need to find a way or a practice in your life that allows you to express all of those different aspects of your being. Because when you leave one or another of them completely untouched or underutilized, it can often act as a hindrance for your own progress. So, like a good example might be someone who's an amazing classical musician, but they never do any exercise at all, and they think they hate exercise, and over time their body becomes weak and it becomes lethargic, and it actually becomes a hindrance to their musical practice, that creative output. And so it becomes, they might start develop, injuries or tightness in their body because they're not using that capacity. So I think Sri Chinmoy even talked about that even your capacities that you don't use at some point can become your enemies.
Use it or lose it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, Sri Chinmoy was the prime example of somebody who was active in so many different fields, and that's what attracted me to his spiritual path. So he was a musician, he was an artist, he was a poet, he was a writer, he was a weightlifter, he was a runner. He was acting in so many different fields, and I feel that is coming to your point as being generalists. Like, I think the more games we play, the more fulfilled we are as human beings. So we have the capacity to play on many different fields, many different games at the same time. And that is what Sri Chinmoy was showing. He was a painter. He was always composing music. He was an artist. He was always drawing and painting, and so he was expressing himself in so many different ways, which is just, I think that's really what we are capable of as human beings, like you say. And if we are to be the crown of creation, then I think that is the way forward for us. We have to kind of develop ourselves in many, many different ways and kind of, um, develop, express ourselves in the most ways possible. I mean, that's
Yes.
really how I try to live my life.
Yeah, and you're a great example of that because, as I said earlier, when I see you, especially at our meditation retreats or celebrations, you're always partaking in all the games possible. So you're a great lover of games and are trying to play as many games as you possibly can. And
Yeah,
it makes sense because Sri Chinmoy talked about that as well, that rest is often simply a change of activity. So
yeah,
often when we think we're tired, it's simply that we've become tired of that particular activity. And if we can have multiple strings to our bow and have a physical outlet and creative outlet and service outlets, we can always just do something different and we'll find new inspiration, new energy by changing what we were doing. And that's one
yeah,
of the amazing things you see in videos of Sri Chinmoy at his own home. Early in the morning, he might be doing weightlifting to keep his body strong and to inspire people. But then immediately he'll start playing the violin as soon as he stops. And it's just
yeah.
one of the most unlikely combination of activities. But
Exactly.
it's all
You
good.
often see him play violin or a piano or organ or any instrument in his running outfit. Like he's
Yeah.
just like he just worked out, then he's doing, his thing on the harmonium, then
Oh,
he's doing some painting or drawing.
it's such a beautiful thing to see. And I see it in our own community where we have people who are professional musicians in orchestras. And then they're also avid ultra marathon runners and it's like the
Yeah.
most unlikely combination for the world at this point. People don't see that it's possible for you to do all of these things at the same time. But we don't need to look that far back in history, and that was
Yeah.
considered normal. So like a good example is the samurai culture. So the samurai culture in Japan was so wonderful because here were these great warriors who did a lot of martial practice, practicing their art forms, their battle skills. But then in their spare time, they were doing calligraphy, they were writing poetry, they were doing theater performances, all of these different things, which we think, wow, like we don't think of soldiers now as being poets. And but
Yeah.
in previous times, you were expected, if you were a real learned man or a man of the world or a real human being, that you would do all of these different things. You would not limit
Yeah,
yourself.
look at the founding fathers. Like for instance, Thomas Jefferson. He was an architect.
Yeah.
He wrote about botany. He was he developed himself in so many different
He
ways.
was a
And I
great
think
foodie. He was like the original foodie in America.
the original foodie and an inventor. He invented many things. And I think Benjamin Franklin invented a lot of things. And
Hmm.
in those days, yeah, we call it Renaissance man, right? It was
Yeah,
like considered normal. And even I think in like 19th century Vienna, everybody played an instrument. It was like
yeah,
the normal thing to do when you grew up. You
yeah,
played an instrument, and some cultures still have that. Ireland also has that very strong musical culture where people are brought up with an instrument, with playing music. And it's just, so, I think life becomes so much more rewarding and rich when you try to branch out in all these different
yeah. And I
endeavors.
see that in myself in my own life. So I obviously have my work life, I have my sporting life, but I'm always interested in dabbling in the musical instruments that I sell. I get great joy from practicing and learning different instruments from different cultures, and so I'm not a particularly talented person on any one particular instrument, but because I have an access and experience of so many different instruments, people will come in and think, wow, this person is so musical. He can play a little bit on this instrument, a little bit on that instrument. And for me, that gives me some great joy. It's like the jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah,
And
I want to have that on my epitaph. I want to have that on my
yeah,
gravestone.
because often we value being really deep into one particular thing. So choosing one instrument and then getting to the highest possible grade or the highest possible level of mastery in that one particular instrument. But it's a whole different level of mastery when you can play 50 different instruments to some level of
Yeah,
skill. And so
exactly.
those are both, it's like one's moving wide and the other is moving deep. And we've become very obsessed with moving deep into one particular topic, but I think broadening our approach will have better results, perhaps. And don't just
Wonderful.
believe me, try and put it into practice in your own life and
Exactly.
see if it
Don't
works.
take our word for it. Don't
Yeah.
take our word for
Don't
it.
say,
Just do
is
it.
that
And
true or is that real? Say, does that work? And try it
I love
yourself.
that.
That's what we'd like to say.
Fantastic. Do you have anything else to say about time? Have we wrapped up that subject? Because we're nearing the end of our hour and a half.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I would also just like to perhaps say we're living in interesting times, and times are constantly changing. So being able to update yourself and be competent being in the particular age you're living in is also very useful. And so there's one thing you and I have talked a little bit about, creativity and the creative output. And it seems as though in the past we valued quality. So you look back to Michelangelo's David or Rembrandt's The Night Watch or any of these amazing works of art, and you see the quality in them is unbelievably high. But you see as well that often the quantity, the output of these great painters and these great creative types was it wasn't boundless. Let's say, you know, they did as much as they could, and they had a strong creative urge. You know, some like Picasso, I know, did, you know, boundless amount of art, but that's much more in the recent times. So I think creativity has changed over time in the age we're living in. Now we're living in a very particular age where now we value quantity far more than we value the quality of any one particular piece. And so you see that with content creators now. If you made one video every 2 years and it was amazing, no one would watch you. Like, no one would even find you, because we're living in this age where it's like the quantity of the output is really, really valuable. And it's the same with a musician. If your favorite band only put out one album every 2 years, people would get super frustrated with them now, because people now really want constant newness, quantity. So even if it's not perhaps at the highest standard, people are happy instead to have a real boundless output. And the amazing thing for me, because I've heard a lot of content creators talk about that, the game now is about, you know, constant creative output rather than the particular quality. And it's really amazing for me to see, because Sri Chinmoy himself started this trend, I think, in the 1970s when he started his painting career, or before that with his poetry. He was someone who approached it in almost like an athlete would approach it, where time was incredibly valuable to him. And so he wanted to see over a certain period of time, how many paintings could he do? How many poems could he write over a particular period of time? And I don't think...
So he wrote, at one point, he wrote 1,200 poems in the span of 24 hours.
Which is just, and when you read them as well, it's not just simple one word, you know, short poems. They're very profound and deep and powerful. And so he was a great example of this idea of having a huge creative output. And for him, he was connected with the source of creativity. He would often talk about that his poetry or his paintings he would see a streak of light and he would follow that, or he would get some inner inspiration, and that allowed him to be so creative. But I think it's very interesting just to look at the time we're living in now and see that this is a time where people really value your output, your creative output. And they're less judgmental, I think, on any one particular piece. They're not looking for perfection anymore. Whereas perhaps in the past, the artists were aiming more towards their own perfection of their skill and their craft. Now people are happy if you put out something every week that gives them a lot of joy. And so I think that's just an interesting thing to note.
And also, I think when you do that, the idea that you create, you know, a really good piece is increasing. If you create a lot, then, you know, some of these creations will be of higher quality than others. And then there may be some, you know, that are really good. So you hone your skill by doing doing it. So we have to talk about that more in later episodes. But anyway, we'll talk about lots of other stuff in later episodes. And we kind of have to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for your fantastic input in our discussion about time. I guess we'll see you next week.
And yes, I will look forward to that. And we're also on our own journey of creativity with this podcast. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to hone our own skills and hone our own ideas. And so I'm always very grateful to you, Abhinav, for creating this podcast and allowing me to be on it with you. And let's see where it goes.
Very interesting to see. So anyway, if you'd like this podcast, please subscribe, leave a comment or a review. We're very grateful and happy for that. And I guess upwards and onwards.
Yes, all the best.